Good day, everyone. Richard Cowperthwait for Northwest Access TV. Thanks for joining us for another one of our series of interviews with local candidates in contested local races. And we have just that in, I guess, what is still the Franklin-3 House District, soon to be the Franklin-3 House District. And again, we have the incumbent, Democratic Rep. Mike McCarthy, running for re-election, and Republican challenger Joe Luno. Good to see you guys. Thanks for jumping in.
Thanks for having us, Richard.
We'll do a half hour. I guess let's start redistricting. I guess that worked out pretty well. I interviewed Rep. Casey Toof and his challenger Lauren Dees Erickson. So a bit of a change. Of course, Franklin-3 was a two-member district covering all of St. Albans City, part of St. Albans Town, and Mike, it worked out to change that to two single-member districts with basically the same terrain. But again, so whoever wins this race will be representing wards 1 through 4 in St. Albans City in the future, and the other in Franklin 8 will be wards 5 and 6 in some of St. Albans Town.
Yeah, it's
that made sense to go that route, you think?
Yeah, so the trick is that as in the past decade, St. Albans Town and City together get 3. So you've got the two municipalities get 3, and so how do you carve them up?
Rep. Lynn Dickinson having most of St. Albans Town, running unopposed for re-election.
Right, and so the main driving thing with redistricting for folks who are uninitiated is making sure that there's roughly proportional representation. That there's about 4,300 people is the ideal number. I think it was 4,287.
Yeah.
So we had just about the right number for 3 reps, and right now it's a 2-seat district in the city that also includes that southern chunk of the town. And actually Joe and I are both on the Board of Civil Authority, and there was robust conversation about, should we keep it 2, should we go to 1? The majority of folks wanted it to be 2 single-seat districts. And so we came to a consensus around, in the city, we hadn't changed the ward boundaries since the 60s.
Really?
So it was, we worked together to also redistrict the ward boundaries for the first time in a long time, so that those were proportional. And then the new wards 1, 2, 3, and 4 are going to be the new Franklin-3 that we're running in.
Joe, you comfortable with the redistricting, how that worked out?
Absolutely. So ultimately, boards of civil authority and involved communities can inform government ops, which is a committee Mike sits on, as to what their preference would be. So the St. Albans Town BCA voted unanimously to go to this current format. St. Albans City, the vote was 9-3 or something like that. And I think Mike was in the 3, but that's fine. But he understood that that's what the community was looking for, and that's ultimately where we ended up. The ward line redraws were long overdue. Ward 4 particularly was much smaller than the other wards, and so ward residents didn't have equal representation on council.
What wards are you guys, Mike?
So I represent Ward 4, the ward that was really underpopulated in the old map on the city council, and Joe is one of my constituents in Ward 4.
So both Ward 4 for you folks?
We're both Ward 4 residents. That's true.
Just again, try to cover a lot of ground. Be as concise as you can. Joe, let's start with you. Give us some background. Why'd you decide to jump into this race?
To begin with, just a little bit about me. I'm a lifetime resident of St. Albans City. I attended St. Albans City School at BFA St. Albans. Got a bachelor's from Boston College in history. With the exception of that time in Boston, I've always been in the St. Albans area. And I think it's critical that St. Albans be represented by someone whose real priority is what the constituents want, and I think I have some respectful fundamental disagreements with the incumbent.
And give us a little bit of work background for you these days.
I work in my family's business, which is Handy Toyota, and I've been there full-time since I got out of school in 1997. We employ a little bit over 100 people here in the St. Albans area. And St. Albans has been very good to us. So we have a facility off exit 20 and in our original store, which is by Taylor Park.
Right. Mike, some background. Again, no stranger to Montpelier. Hoping to get back there. Give us a little background and why. Easy decision to run for re-election?
Yeah, I've really enjoyed serving 3 terms now in the Vermont House, representing St. Albans City and part of the town. I first got involved in local politics when I owned Cosmic Bakery and Cafe on Main Street for a few years, and we were going through the revitalization process. I was really proud to serve on the downtown board and several years as chair there. And Vermont right now has enormous opportunity. You know, we're seeing a real change in the number of people who want to live here. We have a lot of crises that we need to work on in order to have the housing and the child care and the health care that people need, and to make sure this is a place where working families can thrive. But I have just seen an enormous amount of progress in the legislature. The federal funding that we've been able to leverage has made it so that we're laying the foundation for fixing a lot of problems that we haven't had the resources to fix. And I want to go back to Montpelier to help continue to invest in St. Albans and in Vermont.
I guess a big issue on the ballot statewide, 2 constitutional amendments proposed, and the one getting obviously a lot of attention, the most attention, Article 22, Prop Proposal 5, the Reproductive Liberty Amendment. How do you come down on that?
Yeah, well, I voted yes for it twice. So the constitutional process, you get 2 opportunities to vote in 2 separate biennia. And now it's before the voters. And I think what's really important is that people know that this is an amendment that's really designed to protect the reproductive liberty, the right to access abortion, of course, but also contraception. And you know, our state has a pretty scary history of forcing people to be sterilized in the early 20th century with the eugenics movement. So it also addresses some of those issues. And there is a lot of misinformation, I think, and a lot of misunderstanding about why we did put this forward. But I think the fundamental thing is that we see a really extreme Supreme Court taking away 50 years of precedent and the ability for women to make their own choices about their bodies, and we want to make sure that's protected in Vermont.
Joe?
I support both constitutional amendments.
And in fact, yeah, I might as well certainly mention the other one, not getting too much attention, doesn't seem to be any controversy about it. Article 1, Prop 2 is the other, prohibiting slavery and indentured servitude. And you support that?
Yeah, you know,
has anybody even asked you about that? Has that come up at all?
Just more like, wait, what? Isn't Vermont the first state to outlaw slavery in our Constitution? What is this about? And we actually kind of had some loopholes around indentured servitude and some archaic language. And really, we're just clarifying what I think is the real Vermont value of, we want to make sure it's clear that there is no support for unpaid labor, indentured servitude, or slavery.
So, Joe, you support both constitutional amendments?
Certainly. And I haven't found any indentured servitude proponents in the course of this campaign.
You don't have anybody out of handy Toyota, I trust?
No. We've recently had a workman's comp audit, and we were everybody was covered. You know.
Sure. Who are you supporting for governor?
You know, that's a distinction between myself and my opponent. I'm supporting Governor Scott, as did over 78% of Franklin County voters last time around. I had an opportunity to be at a forum this past Tuesday, and clearly there's a distinction there. So,
supporting Governor
and Mike,
Scott.
if you I think it's pretty clear you're supporting Brenda Siegel.
Yeah, I endorse Brenda Siegel, and in large part because there have been several things that I disagree with the governor on. We've worked really well with the governor on about 80% of policy, but this governor has an historic number of vetoes, especially those that came after years of work with Republicans, progressives, Democrats like me, voting for bills, and then they get vetoed with very little testimony from the administration or participation on the front end. Really important stuff like Act 250 governance. So I think that I'd like to have a governor who is a better partner than Governor Scott has been for those of us in the legislature. But I know that a lot of our constituents do support Governor Scott. I have some fundamental disagreements with him that many of my constituents also do. And it's complicated. People can support somebody like Governor Scott and also support me.
Brenda Siegel certainly has her support out there. I think a lot of people didn't see her as a particularly strong Democratic candidate. Would you have liked to have seen a stronger Democratic candidate? Are you comfortable with Brenda Siegel as a Democratic candidate for governor?
I really agree with Brenda Siegel's values. I think that her the things that she stands for are in large part the things that I stand for. I would definitely want to have a governor that has more, executive leadership experience than Brenda Siegel has, to be totally frank. But I think my endorsement of her is an opportunity for me to say, hey, there are actually some challenges with this administration. Most notably is that, we appropriated $7 million to help with child care staff retention. And that money took so long to get out the door. And we've got child care centers closing, in centers that serve our community. It just came up on Front Porch Forum from a constituent in the last couple of days. So there are some things that aren't really working well in state government, and I'd like to see them work better. And that's part of why I'm running to go back and be a part of that discussion.
Of the governor's many vetoes, I think a record number of vetoes by a Vermont governor. Are any of those vetoes you were comfortable with, or did you think every one of those vetoes was a bad move by the governor?
So almost all of them were a bad move, but the biggest thing was the process. This administration seems to have some contempt for the legislature, which I don't really understand. We invite the administration in when our constituents elect Governor Scott, and then they elect Democrats like me to leadership. We've got to go down there and work together regardless of party. And what has happened on many of these key issues is that the governor has sat out the conversation. I mean, big stuff. We did a pension bill that will save the state of Vermont tens of millions of dollars every single year for the next 2 decades. And it required the speaker and the pro tem and leaders like me and the GovOps committee to negotiate with the unions, with our executive branch, basically saying, you guys figure it out. And that was pretty frustrating because we don't have the same kind of resources that the executive branch has. Luckily, we had Treasurer Pierce's office, and we have some pretty capable staff. But I think that deal could have been better if the governor had been involved sooner and been more of a partner. Okay,
let me just move on. Joe, you've certainly been paying attention, I'm sure, to a lot going on in Montpelier. Comfortable with those vetoes to the extent you've been watching that stuff?
Well, yeah, and just to back up a little bit, and Mike certainly has the right to endorse Brenda Siegel, but that is out of step with the majority, or at least the plurality of Democratic voters.
Right, but what about the veto issue?
I think it is fortuitous that these we had some vetoes sustained. I mean, we talked about affordability issues and really an affordability crisis we're in, and the need for sustainability for working families. Things that were vetoed: we had a carbon tax vetoed, we had a payroll tax vetoed, we had a de facto rental housing tax vetoed, we had a contractor tax vetoed, and the last two vis-a-vis statewide registries, which would have added new layers of cost. Act 250 reform really wasn't, because there was a poison pill there, right? So would have actually added review for roads that were constructed over several hundred feet. I don't have the number in front of me. So I think we're fortunate. We're fortunate. A lot of people, most people rely on fossil fuels to heat their homes. There's been upward pressure on pricing. And going into this winter, I don't think we need another tax on top of what already is a tough bill for people to get by.
Okay, let's move on. This is kind of an in-house question. I think, Mike, this has come up before. Again, Northwest Access TV, I guess one of 24 such stations in Vermont. And funding, as a lot of organizations run into funding concerns about that, in part because less people subscribing to cable, so running into a decrease in revenue. Question, do you support the idea of yearly funding requests or restructuring something like Vermont's telecommunications taxes to benefit public access stations statewide and keep their overall mission going for years to come?
Yeah, I think it's really important right now, especially when there's so much disinformation, that people have the opportunity to have local media and the opportunity to have locally produced media and citizen voices. So yes, absolutely support the mission of our public access network across the state. We've had the dedicated revenue source, coming from the basically cable providers, right? And as people kind of switch over to internet and streaming, I think that the revenue will need to evolve with that, but it already is actually, in fact. And so we were discussing that with Alan, who's helping us out behind the scenes here today.
Alan's a key guy around here.
And I think it's important that we just make sure with all of our taxes, fees, that as as things change and needs change, that we adapt and evolve, and that's something that I'll definitely keep an eye on to make sure that we can sustain this important community resource.
Joe, any thoughts on that?
So I would concur that public access is an important resource. Locally, the St. Albans Messenger still exists, and we're fortunate because many local papers don't exist at all. But
Hopefully we'll still see 2 issues a week for
But that
a while
said,
longer.
it's a shadow of what it was. And
Not to mention the Free Press, which I wrote for
the Free
20
Press
years.
is a shadow of what it was. Neither of them have a whole lot of local content. We used to have a really robust local radio station.
I remember that station.
Yeah, and we used to have personalities like Leonard Parent and Scoop Foley and Duke Forrest, and we don't hear from those guys anymore. So
Yeah, it's a different world out there for sure.
it absolutely is. It absolutely is.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. Cannabis, I guess, and I should know, we're taping this show on Thursday, October 6th, so I got the right date, in case anything comes up in the next couple of weeks and people are wondering why we're not talking about it. So Thursday, October 6th. So again, Election Day just over a month away, and folks can vote anytime between now and November 8th. Cannabis, I guess this past Saturday, October 1st, cannabis retail shops were allowed to open in Vermont. I guess St. Albans City, correct me if I'm wrong, hasn't voted on that?
No, the St. Albans City hasn't taken any action.
St. Albans Town, in fact, approved it, I believe.
Yeah.
So no action on that. Of course, you're on the city council also. Did that come up at the council, Mike?
We've had conversations, but I think the consensus was to take a wait-and-see approach and to not dive in and be one of the first adopters. And there's pros and cons to that. But I think St. Albans City has done a lot of innovative things. We've got a really vibrant downtown, thanks to lots of people pulling and the kind of support that we provided with public-private partnerships in the TIF district. So I think we were protective of the downtown and wanted to kind of wait and see what would happen. And there wasn't really a strong public push. There were some folks in the community who wanted us to host a retail outlet, and I think that we may in the future, but there wasn't kind of any urgency around being one of the first.
So it sounds like you're not particularly eager to see that at this point anyway.
I mean, I've been a supporter of both decriminalization and moving to a tax and regulated cannabis market, and government operations. The committee I served on the last 2 years has been involved in some of the evolution of the Cannabis Control Board and making sure that we're keeping folks as safe as possible. Having the kind of licensure that'll create a market that's well regulated, but. The need to have a retail establishment right in St. Albans City didn't seem a first priority for the council, and I think we may look into that in the future, though.
Okay. Joe, your thoughts?
I've spoken with some people in the industry, and so it appears as though, although retail sales could start October 1st, in practice, for the most part, they're not, because there's no inventory. No legal inventory, and I've been advised that there's a very tight process whereby from seed to flower, this stuff needs to be tracked. And so I'm not expert on the subject, but it seems like it's off to sort of a wonky administrative start, which I guess could be expected almost. And so hopefully it gets cleaned up, because at the end of the day, if the regulation creates a situation where the pricing is like this in the stores, and traditional sources are like this, and I mean, people can grow it legally anyway, then I think there potentially could be a major non-event, because you'll end up with cannabis stores in ski towns or in Woodstock, and your regular Vermonters who do and have consumed this are just going to keep doing it the way they've done it.
In fact, have you heard of any in Franklin County? Is there any nothing I'm aware of?
There have been license applications. One of the things that slowed things down was there was the appropriation and the statute created, and it took a long time for appointees to review those license applications to be appointed. But I will say that I think it's more important that we go slow, that we get it right, rather than have the kind of experience that, for instance, like California or Colorado had, where they had a little bit of a cannabis gold rush, and then they have sort of like McBud's pot shop open up on every street corner, and that wouldn't be good for our communities. And I know that's not what our constituents want.
Joe, I think you touched on it, Mike, maybe as well. It sounds like the biggest word I'm hearing in the legislative races this year is affordability. That seems to be the the huge word. I guess my question, it's a big question down to 10 minutes left here. Is it realistic to think Vermont can become a more affordable state? That's what I'm sure everybody wants. Is that realistic, given what seems to be an increasing demand for state services all the time?
And so Vermont has an inherent challenge in that we're a state with about, 625,
About the
628,000
same as the city of Boston, yeah, maybe
residents.
a little more, but
And
yeah.
so with that, we have to obtain funding for all the same trappings as a state like California or Texas or New York would. We're also in a cold weather area, which is an inherent disadvantage. It taxes our roads and highways. That said, I think there are some opportunities to make Vermont a more affordable place than it is. We're one of the heavily taxed states in the union.
Any list I see, I read a lot of magazines, Vermont is invariably in the top 10 worst tax states of everything
Absolutely,
I ever see.
and specifically, Richard,
Or highest tax states.
some things I'd like to see would be an exemption for Social Security and military benefits. There's a small military benefit exemption now, but most states don't tax either of those things.
And Social Security got some help from the legislature, but not all the way.
Not much.
We did a number of things. So already the first $45,000 for an individual was exempt, and we raised that to $50,000.
Okay.
And we'll continue to move in that direction, I think.
You think at some
But there's
point
a
that'll-
balance that we really wanted to strike with H510, which was our tax bill. And key thing that we did when you're talking about affordability is balance the pressure between different parts of our constituents. And one thing that we did that I'm the most proud of is that anybody who has a child 6 and under is going to see a $1,000 tax credit per child on their Vermont income taxes. That child tax credit is going to do an enormous amount for people. We also made student loans deductible and increased those exemptions so you can keep more of your Social Security that's not taxed. The vast majority of people relying on Social Security don't pay any Vermont income tax on that today. So for folks that are collecting a pension and Social Security that are significant benefits like my dad, for instance, those people are relatively comfortable Vermonters, and we want to balance, their tax capacity with our desire to make sure that we have tax fairness for people who are just getting a start in their profession. So tax policy can get pretty complicated, but I think we've moved in the direction of both, for retirees and for young families, saving, I think the total estimate was $41 million for Vermont families with H510 this year. I'm really proud to have been part of leading the charge on that bill.
Okay, Joe, you want to get some more?
Well, anyway, so this is what happens. I'm on the St. Albans Museum Board. I'm a trustee, and we lose half our volunteers every year. Okay, because they go to Florida. They're Florida residents. Okay, because they're avoiding these taxes.
Hopefully, we're living in Southwest Florida at this point.
Hopefully
which is
not.
probably some of
Hopefully
them
not.
are.
I've gotten mixed results on the disasters down there.
Yeah.
And so you talk about it being more equitable, but it needs to be equitable relative to other states, or a lot of these individuals just aren't going to live here. They're not going to pay rooms and meals to going to Jeff's Seafood on Tuesday in February, and I think it's a real lost opportunity. And when you look at our non-competitive position on military benefits, we've got people who could be as young as their late 30s who have been 20-year-plus military folks. And we want them here. We need them in the labor force. And right now, our tax policy is encouraging them to either move to other states, or if they were native Vermonters and have served their 20-plus years, we're encouraging them not to move back here. And we need people, and I think it's a problem, and I think that's something that it seems like an easy win.
Again, I'm just struck by it. Just seems like there are more and more demands for state services. I guess the homelessness issue is on my mind, with the governor getting some sharp criticism with the Vermont Emergency Rental Assistance Program or whatever, and I guess that was running out of funding, or anyway. And I just saw some of the criticism of the governor. Governor, how can you possibly, let that situation lapse, not re-up that? But my question is, should dealing with homeless people, should that kind of be an official responsibility of state government, and pay whatever it costs, Mike? Just one thing that comes to my mind.
Yeah, I think it's so fundamentally we want to root ourselves in the value and dignity of each person, right? And I think that the ways that we've dealt with homelessness as an emergency have been far more expensive than having strategies where we are investing in housing that can help people transition, that we have wraparound services that help support people in jobs. There's a great new program that United Way has been doing for a couple of years. It's called Working Bridges, and it partners with employers to help people stay employed, right, that are at risk of because losing transportation or housing, and help do some of the problem solving. We have the ability in Vermont to make sure that no one has to be completely unhoused. We really do have the ability to do that. We've made investments in taking old motels and other properties that have multiple units and rehabbing them. The VHIP money to bring more units online that landlords just couldn't afford to fix up, I think is a really important program. And again, that money's just been a little slow to kind of get out into the communities where we need it.
Didn't Doug Harper, the state auditor, he got into that a while ago and came up with, as I recall, a huge figure of the many millions of dollars that Vermont had spent on that issue. But the suggestion was a lot of it hadn't really been that beneficial.
Absolutely. So it's like, how are you using this money? What percentage of this money gets to the end user, if you will?
But do you see that as a responsibility? Should state government, Joe, do what it needs to do to take care of homeless people who are, in pretty tough shape?
Absolutely. I'd concur with the preponderance of Mike's comments, and I would add that there's a certain part of this population that you're not going to transition. For various reasons, you're just not going to. And we need to recognize that, and we need to be able to deal with that as though it is not an emergency, because we know this every winter. Don't act like when it's 5 below, there are certain people that suddenly don't have housing. Like this happens every year. It's as certain as a snowfall.
Yeah,
so how do you deliver that product more efficiently with the resources that we have?
And there are some homeless people. I mean, in your district ward, we are talking some homeless people around here.
Yeah, and we've done a few things that I think are going to be helpful. The partnership between CVOAO and Tim's House, and having a lower barrier, single room occupancy to be able to allow them to serve the diversity of folks who show up at their door is really going to be beneficial. We have transitional housing, we have recovery housing, but the real face of the housing crisis that I see is folks who are working and sleeping in their car or couch surfing, that they just can't find an affordable apartment. And so the housing stock and the roughly $250 million a year that we appropriated to make sure that we're building more units, that's like the key thing, is to be able to have housing that's affordable across the income spectrum. We have the real face of sort of the housing crisis that we're hearing in the statistics isn't the person who's struggling and needs that emergency housing all the time, really. The vast majority of people are folks who are kind of underhoused or unhoused and are couch surfing or sleeping in their car, and a lot of those folks are working. This isn't the kind of stereotype and the image that people have in their head.
Yeah, we've gotten, down to under 2 minutes. Joe, touch on that briefly, and I'll let you have
certainly this topic is its own show.
Yeah, right.
Give you about 45 seconds or so. So make your case. Why should you be sent to Montpelier?
Why should I? At the end, we talk about all these affordability issues and some various positions, like the carbon tax, for example. And at the end of the day, I think that government needs to fulfill the services it's responsible for, and that's what it needs to do. A fundamental difference between myself and my opponent is that I think that you can spend your money in your best interest better than the government can. And then there's kind of this other thought that the government can spend resources on your behalf better than you can. That's really what it boils down to on a lot of these issues.
Okay. Mike, give you about 45 seconds. Make your case.
Yeah. So I've served 3 terms, running for my 4th term in the House. The experience that I bring, my position, and having been elected by 91 of my colleagues to be the assistant majority leader, puts me in a place where I'm able to leverage resources and be at the table when really key decisions are being made. I deeply listen to every constituent. I respond to constituent calls. When we were legislating by Zoom and folks were struggling with Department of Labor and getting unemployment insurance and weren't sure if the economy was going to bounce back during the height of COVID, I dropped everything, worked the phones, and helped people get the resources that they need. I want to go back to Montpelier and serve this community well and make sure that St. Albans and Vermont take advantage of opportunities and can solve some of the challenges we've talked about today.
Very good. We'll leave it right there. Thanks to Democratic Rep. Mike McCarthy running for re-election, Republican candidate Joe Luno. Thanks for the time, folks. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Richard.
Thank you very
And
much.
thanks to my man Alan Cunningham out there, the key guy around here. I'm
Thank you,
Richard
Alan.
Cowperthwait for Northwest Access TV. See you next time.